My name is Seraphina Cross and I'm 28 years old. Last Tuesday, I discovered my parents had secretly given my brother Marcus $725,000 to buy his third luxury car collection while telling me my $70,000 tech startup was too risky for family investment. But that betrayal was nothing compared to what I found in their safe that same night. The family business I'd been excluded from my entire life, built on lies that would destroy everything they'd worked for. And I was about to make sure they paid for every single deception. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this absolutely wild family revenge story, I need to know, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. And if you're ready for a story that'll make your jaw drop about family betrayal and the sweetest revenge you've ever heard, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because trust me, you won't believe what happens next. This family drama has more twists than a pretzel factory. Growing up as the only daughter in the Cross family meant living in Marcus's shadow from day one. While I graduated summa cum laude from MIT with degrees in computer science and business, Marcus barely scraped through community college before Dad handed him a vice president title at Cross Industries. When I pitched my AI-powered logistics platform that could revolutionize supply chain management, Dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. Seraphina Honey Technology Ventures are extremely volatile. We can't risk family money on something so uncertain, he'd said, his voice dripping with that patronizing tone I'd heard my entire life. Maybe find a nice, stable job at an established company. Meanwhile, Marcus had just received his third business loan from our parents, this time for $725,000 to expand his vintage car collection that he claimed was an investment opportunity. His previous investments included a failed nightclub and a cryptocurrency venture that lost $200,000 when he forgot his wallet passwords. The favoritism wasn't subtle. Every family dinner became a celebration of Marcus's mediocrity, while my achievements were dismissed as nice hobbies. When I won a prestigious innovation award from the Tech Entrepreneurs Association, Mom's response was asking when I'd settle down and give them grandchildren. When Marcus bought his 15th car, Dad threw a party and invited the entire neighborhood. But last Tuesday changed everything. I'd driven to their house in Westchester to pick up some old textbooks from my childhood room. Mom and Dad were supposed to be at their weekly bridge club, so I used my spare key. I was heading upstairs when I heard Dad's voice coming from his study, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. The Singapore shipment needs to be rerouted through the Panama subsidiary. Make sure all documentation shows textile imports, not electronics. And for God's sake, make sure the customs paperwork matches the shell company registration. I froze on the staircase. Cross Industries was supposed to be a legitimate textile import business. Dad had always claimed they dealt exclusively with high-end fabrics for fashion designers. But electronics, shell companies, this sounded like something much more sinister. I crept closer to the study door, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. Through the crack, I could see Dad at his desk, phone pressed to his ear while Mom sat in the leather armchair organizing what looked like financial documents. How much did the customs official in Long Beach require this time, Dad? Continued. Fine. Just make sure Marcus doesn't know about any of this. The boy couldn't keep a secret if his life depended on it. Mom looked up from her papers. Richard, are you sure we're doing the right thing keeping Seraphina out of the business? She's so much sharper than Marcus. Sometimes I think. Absolutely not, Dad interrupted sharply. She asks too many questions. Always has. Marcus follows orders without thinking twice. That's exactly what we need for this kind of operation. My blood ran cold. They weren't keeping me out because of some outdated, sexist belief about women in business. They were keeping me out because I was too smart to be complicit in whatever illegal operation they were running. I carefully backed away from the door and slipped out of the house, my mind racing. For 28 years, I'd blamed myself for not being good enough, not being worthy of their respect or investment. I'd internalized their rejection, thinking there was something fundamentally wrong with me. But the truth was infinitely worse. They deliberately excluded me because my integrity threatened their criminal enterprise. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every family memory replayed in my head with this new sickening context. The mysterious business trips Dad took every month. The way conversations stopped when I entered rooms. The enormous house, the luxury cars, the expensive vacations. None of it made sense on the profit margins of a textile import business, especially one that Marcus supposedly helped manage. By Thursday, I'd made my decision. I needed evidence. Real, concrete proof of what they were doing. And I knew exactly where to find it. Friday evening, I waited until I saw their car leave for their dinner reservation at the country club. This time, I didn't just creep around eavesdropping. I went straight to Dad's study and found the safe hidden behind his diploma from Wharton. The combination was painfully predictable. Marcus's birthday, of course. Inside, I found a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Bank statements showing hundreds of thousands of dollars in unexplained transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Shipping manifests that didn't match import declarations. Communications with customs officials that were clearly bribery arrangements. And most damning of all, a detailed ledger showing that Cross Industries had been smuggling high-end electronics from Asia and selling them through a network of shell companies, avoiding millions in import duties and taxes. The scope was staggering. This wasn't some small-time operation. They'd been running this sophisticated smuggling ring for over 15 years, since right around the time I graduated high school and started asking more questions about the family. Business. But what truly broke my heart was finding a series of emails between my parents discussing me. Dad writing Seraphina's moral compass would never allow her to understand the complexity of international business. Better to keep her focused on her little computer projects. Mom responding, "Sometimes I think we're making a mistake. She's brilliant, Richard. Smarter than both of us." Dad's reply was brutal. "Intelligence without flexibility is dangerous in our line of work. Marcus may be simple, but he's loyal. Seraphina would turn us in the moment she discovered the truth." The irony was devastating. They'd been right to fear my moral compass, but wrong to think they could hide their crimes forever. As I photographed every document, every statement, every piece of evidence, I realized that their decades of dismissing me as too idealistic had created their worst nightmare, someone with both the intelligence to understand their operation and the motivation to destroy it. They'd taught me that family loyalty was everything. Now I was about to show them what betrayal really looked like. The weekend after my discovery felt surreal, like living in a parallel universe where everything looked the same but nothing was real. Saturday morning, Mom called to invite me to brunch, her voice warm and loving, completely oblivious that I now knew the truth about everything. I declined, claiming I had too much work to do on my startup. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same startup they'd dismissed as too risky while running a multi-million-dollar criminal operation. I spent those 48 hours in my apartment, surrounded by printed copies of their incriminating documents, planning my next move. My first instinct had been to call the FBI immediately, but something held me back. Maybe it was 28 years of conditioned family loyalty, or maybe it was the strategic part of my brain that recognized this situation required more finesse than a simple phone call to federal authorities. The truth was, I wanted them to understand exactly what they'd lost by underestimating me. I wanted them to realize that their too idealistic daughter was capable of dismantling their entire empire with the same precision they'd used to build it. This wasn't just about justice. This was about proving that their assessment of my character was both completely accurate and their greatest vulnerability. By Monday morning, I had a plan that would have made my MIT strategy professors proud. Phase 1, gather intelligence on their entire network. Phase 2, identify all co-conspirators and establish the full scope of their operation. Phase 3, systematically dismantle their business relationships and expose their crimes to the exact people who could cause maximum damage. Phase 4, deliver everything to law enforcement with such overwhelming evidence that prosecution would be inevitable. But first, I needed to understand Marcus's role in all this. My gut told me he was more pawn than player, but I needed confirmation. That required getting close to him without arousing suspicion, which meant swallowing my pride and playing the role of the loving sister I'd always tried to be. I called Marcus Tuesday morning and suggested we grab lunch at that expensive steakhouse he loved my treat. He was surprised but pleased. We'd grown distant over the years, largely because I'd gotten tired of watching him receive everything I'd earned. But now I needed him to trust me. You know, Marcus, I've been thinking about Dad's business lately, I said, over our appetizers, keeping my tone casual. I feel like such an outsider sometimes. You're so lucky he's brought you into the family company. Marcus lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. Finally, someone was acknowledging his importance. It's a lot of responsibility, Sierra. More complicated than most people realize, I bet. All that international shipping and customs paperwork must be incredibly complex. Oh, the customs stuff isn't my department, he said quickly, then caught himself. I mean, I handle more of the client relations side. Dad says I'm better with people than paperwork. I pressed gently. That makes sense. You always were the charmer in the family. Do you work with those overseas suppliers much? Marcus looked uncomfortable for the first time. Dad prefers to handle all the international relationships personally. He says it's too sensitive for anyone else to manage. Bingo. Marcus was definitely a front, probably completely unaware of the criminal nature of their operations. Dad had been smart to keep him in the dark while using his signature on legitimate documents. Marcus's genuine ignorance would be his legal protection and their operational security. This revelation actually made my plan more complex. I couldn't expose the operation without destroying Marcus's life too, and despite everything, he was still my brother. He was guilty of willful blindness and enjoying the profits of illegal activities, but he wasn't a mastermind. He was a victim of their parents' manipulation, just like I was. Over the next week, I began reaching out to old contacts from my MIT network, specifically those who'd gone into corporate security and financial investigation. I framed my inquiries as research for my startup's compliance protocols. But I was actually learning how to trace complex financial networks and identify the specific agencies that handle customs fraud and international smuggling cases. What I discovered was that Cross Industries was likely under investigation already. Businesses their size, with their import volumes and profit margins, would definitely be on Customs and Border Protection's radar. The sophisticated nature of their document manipulation suggested they'd been flying under the radar through careful planning and strategic bribery, but that kind of operation always left digital footprints. I also learned that the penalties for customs fraud and commercial bribery were severe, potentially decades in federal prison, and forfeiture of all assets connected to the criminal enterprise. Everything my parents owned, including the house I'd grown up in, could be seized by the government. The weight of that reality hit me harder than I'd expected. These weren't just my parents' crimes. They were crimes that would destroy our entire family's legacy and security. Marcus would lose everything too, along with any chance at a legitimate career. The people they employed, the vendors who depended on their business, even some extended family members who'd accepted generous gifts over the years. Everyone would be affected. For a moment, I considered walking away, taking my evidence and burying it, pretending I'd never learned the truth. I could move across the country, start my business somewhere else, and let them continue their operation until someone else inevitably caught them. But then I remembered Dad's email. Intelligence without flexibility is dangerous in our line of work. He'd been right about my moral compass, and that compass wouldn't let me become complicit in their crimes through silence. They'd made their choices for 15 years, knowing the risks and consequences. They'd built their wealth on illegal activities, while lecturing me about taking risks with legitimate ventures. The real tragedy was that they could have built something amazing legally. Dad was brilliant, Mom was organized and detail-oriented, and they had more than enough capital to create a successful import business without breaking any laws. They'd chosen crime not out of necessity but out of greed. By Thursday of that week, I'd made my final decision. I was going to bring down their entire operation, but I was going to do it in a way that protected Marcus and sent a message that would resonate far beyond our family. They thought I was too idealistic to understand the complexity of their world, but I was about to show them that idealism combined with intelligence was the most dangerous force they could have created. The first person I contacted was Sarah Chen, my former roommate from MIT who now worked as a forensic accountant for a federal white-collar crime task force. We'd stayed close over the years, bonding over our shared experience of being underestimated women in male-dominated fields. If anyone would understand both the technical and emotional complexity of my situation, it would be Sarah. I met her for coffee at a small cafe in downtown Boston, far from anywhere my parents might have connections. Sarah immediately noticed my tension. "Sarah, you look like you haven't slept in days. What's going on?" I handed her a manila folder containing copies of the most damning financial documents I'd found. "I need your professional opinion on something, but first I need you to promise this conversation never happened." Sarah's expression grew serious as she reviewed the bank statements and transfer records. Her expertise was immediately evident as she traced the money flows with her finger, connecting patterns I'd only partially understood. "This is sophisticated money laundering," she said quietly. "Whoever set this up understands international banking regulations and has been very careful to stay below reporting thresholds." "How did you get these documents?" I took a deep breath. "It's my parents' company." Sarah's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. "Holy shit, Sarah. Your parents are running a major smuggling operation." "I know. And they've been keeping me out of the family business my entire life because they knew I'd never go along with it." Sarah studied my face carefully. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm going to turn them in. But I need to do it right. My brother is involved, but I don't think he knows it's illegal. I want to protect him if possible while making sure they face consequences for what they've done. This is going to destroy your family. They destroyed our family 15 years ago when they chose crime over integrity. I just didn't know it yet." Sarah closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. "I can't officially help you because of my position, but I can tell you that what you've shown me is enough to trigger a massive federal investigation. Customs fraud at this level with evidence of bribery and money laundering carries serious federal time." "Good," I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "Are you sure about this, Sarah? Once you make this call, there's no going back." I thought about every family dinner where my achievements were dismissed, every time Marcus was praised for mediocrity while I was told to lower my expectations, every conversation that stopped when I entered the room. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then you're going to need more than just financial records. You need operational evidence, shipping documents, communications with overseas contacts, proof of the actual smuggling activities. And you need to understand their entire network so you can give law enforcement a complete picture." Over the next 2 weeks, I became a part-time private investigator. I used my spare key to access their house when they were out photographing every document I could find. I learned to recognize the patterns in their shipping schedules and started tracking their mysterious business associates. The most revealing breakthrough came when I discovered their secure email system. Dad had been careless with his password security, using variations of the same password across multiple accounts. Within hours, I had access to 3 years of communications that laid out their entire operation in devastating detail. They weren't just smuggling electronics, they were running multiple schemes, underreporting the value of luxury goods to avoid duties, mislabeling shipments to take advantage of trade agreement loopholes, bribing customs officials at 3 different ports, even collaborating with suppliers in Asia to provide false documentation that made their shipments appear to comply with trade regulations. The scope was staggering. They'd avoided millions in legitimate taxes and import fees while building their wealth on completely fraudulent foundations. Every luxury they'd enjoyed, every advantage they'd given Marcus, every opportunity they'd denied me, all of it was financed by criminal activity. But what truly solidified my resolve was finding an email exchange from just 6 months earlier. Mom had suggested bringing me into the business to help with their technology systems, writing Seraphina's expertise could help us streamline our operations and reduce our exposure to detection. Dad's response was brutal, absolutely not. Seraphina has always been a self-righteous little princess who thinks the world owes her something for being smart. She'd never understand that sometimes you have to bend rules to succeed in international business. Better to keep funding Marcus's lifestyle and let her figure out how to survive on her own merit. Reading those words in my father's voice felt like being punched in the stomach. Not only had they excluded me from their criminal enterprise, they'd actively resented my moral standards while simultaneously using those same standards to justify their treatment of me. In their minds, my integrity wasn't a virtue. It was a character flaw that made me unsuitable for their version of success. That email became the moment I stopped feeling conflicted about my plan. They'd made their choice about what kind of people they wanted to be, and they'd made their choice about what kind of daughter they valued. Now I was going to show them the consequences of both decisions. I also reached out to David Park, another MIT classmate who'd gone into corporate law and specialized in whistleblower protections. Without revealing specifics, I discussed the legal implications of reporting criminal activity by family members and learned about the federal protections available to people who expose major financial crimes. The key, David explained over lunch, is making sure you have overwhelming evidence and that you report it to the right agencies in the right order. You want to make it impossible for them to dismiss your claims or for the targets to destroy evidence once they know they're under investigation. By the end of those 2 weeks, I had assembled a case that would have impressed any prosecutor. Bank records, email communications, shipping manifests, customs documentation, supplier contracts, and a detailed analysis of their money laundering network. I'd identified every shell company, every bribed official, and every illegal transaction going back 5 years. More importantly, I'd confirmed that Marcus truly was ignorant of the criminal aspects of their operation. His communications were limited to legitimate business activities and social arrangements. Dad had been masterful in compartmentalizing the operation, keeping Marcus focused on the legal facade while handling all criminal activities personally. This revelation actually strengthened my resolve rather than weakening it. Dad hadn't just built a criminal empire. He deliberately cultivated Marcus's ignorance to protect the operation, while simultaneously using that ignorance to justify excluding me. He'd turned my brother into an unwitting accomplice while punishing me for having the exact moral standards that made me unsuitable for their crimes. The beautiful irony was that their assessment of my character was completely accurate. I was too idealistic to participate in their criminal enterprise. But they'd failed to understand that the same idealism that made me unsuitable as an accomplice made me absolutely perfect as the instrument of their destruction. Now I just had to decide when and how to pull the trigger. The perfect moment presented itself during their annual 4th of July party. Every year, my parents hosted an elaborate celebration at their Westchester estate, inviting business associates, local politicians, and prominent community members. This year's guest list included 2 city councilmen, a federal judge, the Port Authority director, and several high-profile clients who had no idea they were participating in a criminal enterprise's social network. I arrived fashionably late, wearing the same dress I'd worn to my MIT graduation, the one Dad had barely acknowledged. Mom greeted me with her usual air kisses and immediately steered me toward the family friends who always asked the same patronizing questions about when I'd settle down and stop playing with computers. "Seraphina, darling, you remember Judge Harrison. He was just telling us about the new federal task force targeting import fraud." Fascinating work, isn't it? The irony was so perfect I almost laughed out loud. Judge Harrison launched into a detailed explanation of how sophisticated criminal organizations were exploiting international trade regulations, completely unaware that he was describing my parents' business model to their daughter. The challenging aspect, he continued, is that these operations often appear completely legitimate on the surface. They use sophisticated documentation and maintain proper business facades. It takes years of investigation to uncover the full scope of their activities. That's fascinating, I replied, meeting my father's eyes across the conversation circle. It must require someone with intimate knowledge of the operation to provide the kind of evidence needed for prosecution. Dad's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. Seraphina has always been interested in law enforcement. Too many crime documentaries, I think. Judge Harrison chuckled. Well, the government certainly appreciates citizens who are willing to come forward with information about financial crimes. The whistleblower protections are quite robust, and the rewards can be substantial for cases involving significant tax evasion. Perfect. I had just learned in front of my father that there were financial incentives for reporting the exact crimes he'd been committing. The look of discomfort that flickered across his face was worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning this moment. As the evening progressed, I moved through the party like a skilled intelligence operative, engaging their business associates in conversations that revealed the full scope of their criminal network. The customs broker who handled their special documentation, the warehouse manager who supervised their flexible inventory practices, the freight forwarder who arranged their alternative shipping routes. Each conversation confirmed details I'd found in their emails while providing new information about their operational methods. By the end of the evening, I had enough additional evidence to map their entire criminal enterprise and identify every co-conspirator. But the most devastating moment came during Dad's traditional 4th of July toast. Standing on their marble terrace overlooking the party he was hosting with money stolen from American taxpayers, he raised his glass and spoke about the importance of family integrity and the American dream. Success in this country comes from hard work, smart decisions, and staying true to your values, he proclaimed to the assembled crowd. My wife and I have built our business on those principles, and we've tried to instill them in our children. The applause was enthusiastic. I stood there, drink in hand, watching their guests celebrate criminals who had just lectured them about integrity. The cognitive dissonance was staggering, and it crystallized my understanding of how my parents had justified their crimes to themselves. They'd created an elaborate mythology where their illegal activities were somehow expressions of entrepreneurial spirit and family values. After the last guest left, I helped Mom with the cleanup while Dad secured the catering equipment. It felt surreal performing these normal family rituals while knowing I was about to destroy everything they'd built. Thank you for coming tonight, sweetheart, Mom said as she loaded champagne flutes into the dishwasher. I know these events aren't really your scene, but it means so much to your father and me when you're here. Of course, Mom. Family is everything, right? She smiled warmly, completely missing the edge in my voice. Exactly. No matter what happens in the world, family always comes first. I nodded, thinking about the FBI contact information Sarah had provided me. The whistleblower hotline number I'd memorized, and the encrypted flash drives hidden in my apartment containing enough evidence to send both my parents to federal prison for decades. You're absolutely right, I said. Family loyalty is everything. The next morning, I made the call that would change our family forever. Special Agent Rebecca Torres of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division listened patiently as I explained who I was and what I'd discovered. When I mentioned the scope of the operation and the quality of evidence I possessed, she asked me to come in immediately. The federal building in Manhattan felt like stepping into a different world. Agent Torres was exactly what I'd expected from Sarah's description. Sharp, professional, and completely focused on the details of financial crimes. She reviewed my evidence with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen every possible variation of corporate fraud. Miss Cross, this is one of the most comprehensive whistleblower packages I've ever received. You've essentially done the investigation for us. How long did it take you to compile all this? 3 weeks of intensive work, but really 28 years of watching them lie about everything while wondering why I was never good enough for their respect. Agent Torres looked up from the financial documents. This is about more than civic duty. They taught me that integrity was weakness and idealism was naivety. I'm about to show them that integrity combined with intelligence is the most dangerous thing they could have created. She smiled grimly. Based on what you've provided, we can have warrants within 48 hours. This level of customs fraud, combined with the money laundering and bribery evidence, will trigger a multi-agency task force. Are you prepared for your family's world to completely collapse? I thought about every dismissive comment every time my achievements were minimized, every family dinner where Marcus was celebrated for mediocrity while I was told my dreams were too risky. I thought about their emails calling me self-righteous and unsuitable for their version of success. Agent Torres, they've been committing federal crimes for 15 years while lecturing me about taking business risks. Their world deserves to collapse. She nodded and reached for her phone. Then let's make sure it happens properly. The raids happened on a Wednesday morning at exactly 6 a.m. I was having coffee in my apartment when my phone started buzzing with frantic calls from Marcus. I let them go to voicemail, needing to hear his reaction without having to pretend surprise. Sarah, oh my God, you need to call me back right now. The FBI is at the house with search warrants. They've got boxes and computers and they arrested Dad. Mom's crying and no one will tell us what's happening. Please call me back. The second voicemail was more panicked. They're at the office too. All the employees are standing outside watching federal agents carry out files. The local news is here. This is insane. Where are you? I waited 2 hours before calling him back, giving the agents time to secure the initial evidence and execute the warrants at all related properties. When Marcus answered, he sounded like he'd aged 10 years in one morning. Seraphina, thank God. Are you seeing the news? They're saying Dad's been arrested for customs fraud and money laundering. This has to be some kind of mistake. Oh my God, Marcus, are you serious? What exactly are they accusing him of? I don't understand any of it. Something about illegal imports and bribing customs officials. They keep asking me about shipping documents and offshore bank accounts. I told them I just handle client meetings and inventory management. I don't know anything about the financial stuff. The genuine confusion in his voice confirmed what I'd hoped. Marcus really was innocent of knowingly participating in their crimes. Dad had protected him through compartmentalization, which would likely protect him legally as well. Where's Mom? They released her after questioning, but she won't talk to anyone. She's just sitting in the living room staring at the wall. Sarah, they seized everything. The bank accounts, the house, even my cars. They said all assets connected to the business are subject to forfeiture. I felt a pang of guilt about Marcus losing his cars, but reminded myself that everything he'd enjoyed was purchased with stolen money. The government was simply recovering what had been taken from American taxpayers through fraudulent import schemes. Have you talked to a lawyer? Dad's attorney won't even return my calls. I think he's trying to distance himself from the whole situation. Sarah, I'm scared. What if they think I was involved? What if I go to prison for something I didn't even know was happening? This was the moment I'd been dreading. Marcus's fear was real. And despite everything, he was still my brother. The anger I felt toward my parents didn't extend to him. He'd been as manipulated as I had, just in a different way. Marcus, listen to me carefully. You need to get your own attorney separate from Dad's. Tell them the truth about exactly what you did and didn't know. If you weren't aware of any illegal activities, you should be protected. How do you know so much about this stuff? I paused, realizing I needed to be careful. I've been researching business law for my startup. Just be honest with investigators and get proper legal representation. The next few days were surreal. Local news coverage was extensive. Prominent import business raided in federal fraud investigation dominated headlines across Westchester County. The details that emerged painted a picture of exactly the sophisticated criminal enterprise I'd documented, but seeing it reported by journalists still felt unreal. Dad was denied bail due to flight risk. Apparently, the offshore accounts I'd uncovered suggested he had the means to disappear internationally. Mom was released, but faced her own charges related to money laundering and conspiracy. The business was completely shut down, with all assets frozen pending criminal proceedings. Marcus called me every day, alternating between panic about his legal situation and bewilderment about how he'd missed the criminal aspects of the business he'd supposedly helped manage. I keep going over everything in my head, he said during one call. All those trips Dad took alone. The way he handled all the paperwork personally. The clients I was never allowed to meet. I thought he was just protective of the business relationships. Marcus, you weren't supposed to figure it out. That was the whole point. But I should have known something was wrong. The profit margins never made sense for a textile business. The expensive lifestyle, the multiple properties, the luxury, everything. I wanted to believe we were really that successful legitimately. I understood his guilt, but I also understood that Dad had deliberately cultivated his ignorance. Marcus had been raised to follow orders without questioning authority, while I'd been raised to challenge everything. Our different personalities had made us useful to our parents in different ways. Him as an unwitting front, me as the excluded conscience who couldn't expose what she didn't know about. The most difficult call came from Mom on Friday night. Her voice was hollow, defeated in a way I'd never heard before. Seraphina, I need you to know that none of this was supposed to affect you children. Your father and I. We made choices that seemed reasonable at the time, but we never wanted to hurt you or Marcus. Mom, you've been hurting both of us for years. You just did it in different ways. What do you mean? You turned Marcus into an accomplice without his knowledge, and me into an outsider for having principles you couldn't corrupt. You destroyed this family long before the FBI showed up. She was quiet for a long time. How did you become so angry? I'm not angry, Mom. I'm disappointed. You raised me to believe in integrity and hard work, then punished me for having the values you taught me. We never meant. You meant exactly what happened. You built a criminal empire and kept out the people who wouldn't participate in it. The only surprise is that you're shocked by the consequences. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment looking out at the city lights, feeling simultaneously vindicated and hollow. I'd gotten exactly the justice I'd wanted, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like performing surgery on my own family. Necessary, successful, but ultimately devastating for everyone involved. The next morning brought news that Dad had agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. Apparently, their criminal network was even larger than I'd realized, involving suppliers and distributors across multiple countries. My evidence had opened up an international investigation that would likely take years to fully resolve. Justice was being served, but the cost was everything I'd ever known about my family. 6 months later, I was standing in the conference room of Torres and Associates signing the final paperwork for the $75 million government contract that would launch my startup into the stratosphere. The same AI-powered logistics platform my parents had dismissed as too risky was now being implemented by the Department of Homeland Security to help detect exactly the kind of customs fraud they'd been committing. The irony was so perfect it felt like cosmic justice. "Congratulations, Miss Cross," said Director Martinez from DHS Procurement. "Your system's ability to identify suspicious shipping patterns and documentation inconsistencies is exactly what we need to close these enforcement gaps." I shook his hand, thinking about how my parents' crimes had inadvertently provided me with the real-world education needed to build the perfect solution. Every fraudulent document I'd discovered in their operation had taught me something new about how criminals exploited customs systems. Their sophisticated money laundering network had inspired features in my platform that could trace complex financial flows across multiple jurisdictions. Thank you, Director. I'm looking forward to helping you catch the bad guys. After the meeting, I drove to the federal courthouse where my parents' sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week. I hadn't spoken to either of them since Mom's phone call 6 months earlier, but I'd followed every development in their case through news coverage and court filings. Dad's cooperation had been extensive, leading to arrests across their entire criminal network. He'd received 12 years in federal prison, while Mom got 8 years for her role in the money laundering operation. The judge had noted during their plea hearings that the sophisticated nature of their crimes and the substantial financial losses to the government warranted significant sentences despite their cooperation. Marcus had been completely cleared of any criminal liability. The FBI investigation confirmed that he'd been genuinely unaware of the illegal aspects of the business, functioning as an unwitting front for legitimate operations, while Dad handled all criminal activities separately. He'd lost everything financially. All assets connected to the business were forfeited, but he'd avoided prosecution. I found him sitting on a bench outside the courthouse, looking older and more serious than I'd ever seen him. The carefree, entitled attitude that had characterized his entire life was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like wisdom. "Hey, Sarah. I wasn't sure you'd come." I sat down beside him, unsure how to navigate this conversation. "How are you holding up?" "Honestly, better than I expected. Losing everything material was terrifying at first, but it's also been liberating. I got a job at a nonprofit that helps ex-offenders find employment. Turns out I'm actually good at connecting with people who've made mistakes and need second chances." "That's amazing, Marcus. I'm proud of you." He looked at me with surprise. "Really, even after everything, you didn't choose any of this. You were as much a victim of their manipulation as I was, just in a different way." We sat quietly for a moment, watching lawyers and defendants flow in and out of the courthouse. Finally, Marcus spoke again. "I know you're the one who turned them in." My heart stopped. "What, I'm not as dumb as everyone always assumed." The timing, the thoroughness of the evidence, the way you knew exactly what questions to ask about legal representation. Plus, Agent Torres let something slip during one of my interviews about how comprehensive the initial whistleblower package was. I waited for anger, accusations, demands for explanation. Instead, Marcus surprised me again. "Thank you. What, thank you for having the courage to do what I never could have done. I was so comfortable living off their money that I never asked the hard questions. You saved me from becoming an actual criminal by stopping this before I learned too much to claim ignorance." Relief flooded through me. I was terrified you'd hate me forever. I should hate you. You destroyed our family and took away everything I'd known my entire life. But here's the thing. You also gave me the chance to build something real. This nonprofit work is the first thing I've ever done that actually matters. The first thing I've earned through my own effort, rather than inheriting through family connections. Marcus stood up and extended his hand to me. "I'd like us to be brother and sister again. Real siblings, not just people who share criminal parents." I took his hand and pulled him into a hug instead. "I'd like that too." 3 years later, my company Crossguard Security had expanded internationally, helping governments across 5 continents modernize their customs enforcement systems. We'd prevented an estimated $2 billion in customs fraud, and I'd been recognized by the president as an outstanding young entrepreneur, contributing to national security. More importantly, Marcus and I had built the kind of sibling relationship we'd never been allowed to have while living under our parents' dysfunction. He'd been promoted to program director at his nonprofit and was dating a fellow social worker who appreciated his authentic personality rather than his family's wealth. We visited our parents, occasionally, separately, and together. Dad had aged dramatically in prison, finally understanding the full cost of his choices. Mom had found religion and spent her time teaching literacy classes to other inmates. They'd both apologized extensively, but I'd learned that forgiveness was a process rather than a single decision. The most unexpected development was my relationship with Sarah Chen. Our professional collaboration on customs enforcement had evolved into a deep, personal connection. She understood both my technical work and the emotional complexity of destroying my own family for the greater good. Last month, she'd moved to New York to work for my company as Chief Compliance Officer. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked one evening as we reviewed expansion plans in my apartment. "Turning in my parents, never. But I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they chose crime over integrity, and I regret that our family was built on lies. But you built something better." She was right. I'd built a company that actually protected people from the kind of fraud my parents had committed. I'd rebuilt my relationship with Marcus on a foundation of honesty rather than shared denial. I'd found love with someone who valued my moral compass rather than seeing it as a character flaw. Most importantly, I'd learned that being too idealistic wasn't a weakness, it was the source of my greatest strength.